The young man, invited to a lavish ball at the castle, smiled broadly and congratulated his host on his third son turning 18 this year, explaining that it would be much easier now that he had 3 grown sons. The interlocutor was clearly in a bad mood, but the guy did not stop talking and asked if it was true that the youngest son had still not awakened. He was concerned about this question, because in this case, the child should stay close to his father and consider his opinion. Remembering that he had never once seen him at his birthday banquets, the young man guessed that the latter was very shy and would have been mocked for his goofiness. The irritated man tiredly covered his eyes, unwilling to tolerate it any longer, and reported that Bliss was unfortunately just in poor health. Suddenly, the man's terrified son burst into the room with a girl in his arms, much to everyone's shock, and asked for help, but the others started whispering about whether he wanted to become fodder for gossip-obsessed aristocrats. As he came closer to the people, the guy said that Shauna, the girl he was carrying, was not breathing, and the Duke family's attending physician couldn't help her, so he asked to call the Harris family's physician. But the father, who didn't even listen to his request, angrily asked who the girl he was bringing was. The young man who stood nearby reported disdainfully that Shauna was Bliss's guide, that is, a mage hired to help awaken the mana. The father of the intruder guessed that he was talking about that talentless guide, who was as talentless as his son because, in his opinion, a man born into a line of magicians must awaken before the age of 10 years. We learn that awakening is the moment at which a person is able to summon mana at will, and the earlier this moment occurs, the more powerful magic the awakened person will master. Yet Bliss should have easily achieved this at 10 years old, but in fact couldn't even at 18. Perhaps the hero's awakening is progressing too slowly because of the poor abilities of the guide who is supposed to stimulate the process, but he simply decided not to send a skillful guide with years of experience because Duke Huff didn't want it, who believed that a grain rotted in the ground would not sprout under any conditions. The third son of Bliss, in whose veins flowed dirty mixed blood, was the only disgrace of the family. So his father, gritting his teeth, asked with hatred why suddenly the boy who lived in silence decided to make this buffoonery, and afterwards asked him to just bury the girl if she was dead, and later he would find him another guide. Lowering his head, the boy stated that he didn't need another guide, and Shayna wasn't dead as her heart was still beating. His words angered the man, and he yelled at his son to stop carrying around a man who had done nothing useful. The man looked angrily at the frightened boy and said that he shouldn't be with a dead man at his older brother's birthday party, but then he guessed that Bliss hated his brother and just wanted to ruin his birthday party. The disgruntled father did not let his interlocutor get a word in edgewise, but shouted that he did not realize his own insignificance, so he could only be jealous. According to him, there had been no such freaks in their Huff family before him, and he should know what shame was, so he should at least repent a little to his brother. The guy, confused, lowered his head and started to apologize, but immediately froze, asking himself why he should be sorry. No one cared about him, which meant he didn't have to apologize to them for anything. Today's birthday banquet was inaugurated in honor of Michael and Bliss's birthday, but the latter was not allowed to even approach him. He was angry and resentful because he had never attended the party. Immersed in his thoughts, the boy guessed that there would be nothing left of him if one excluded suffering and patience, grief and shame, but coming back to reality, he firmly decided that Shauna must live. Gathering his willpower into a fist, the third son bowed and apologized for his frivolous act, explaining that he had no intention of disrupting the banquet out of jealousy of his brother, and only wanted to ask for help, as his guide's condition was extremely grave. Bliss hugged the girl tighter and promised not to bother his father again, just to help him, and agreed to accept any punishment if his guide survived. But even this way of persuasion did not work, and the man shouted with the same anger that he did not even want to listen to him, and then ordered to take the corpse and burn it. The worried fellow, to whom the servants had already started running over to do the Lord's bidding, exclaimed that it couldn't be done since the poor girl wasn't dead yet. He asked politely at first, but his request was ignored, so his magic was immediately awakened to protect Shauna. The father guessed that his third son had awakened ice magic, and was surprised that he had only awakened today, and was able to master magic on such a scale. It was becoming dangerous because if this continued, the entire banquet hall would freeze. The man, coming to his senses, asked the mage to stop, but the man looked at him with exasperated eyes and asked how he could do that if his guide wasn't breathing, and there was no one else to help him stop. The alarmed man guessed that this was no ordinary awakening, but a situation of excess. When awakening in an abnormal way, just as a dam bursts, one loses one's temper because of the surging mana, and a powerful torrent bursts out, which only a guide can stop. The poor girl, who now lay with her eyes humbly closed in the mage's arms, realized that she had failed. Even though her plan had been flawless, she hadn't thought she would receive such a stab in the back from Bliss, whose awakening had frowned upon her death. When the boy first met his assistant as a child, he explained to her that she was now his guide, who was to instruct him, and introduced himself as Bliss Huff. And the latter, giving her name also, bowed respectfully to the child, saying that she was pleased to meet him. Shauna had to eventually agree to it, and Bliss didn't know whether to be happy or sad that his incapable guide had died during the monster hunt. Although, truth be told, the incapable guide, who died back on the first page of the novel, was her, the protagonist. Upon waking up from her death, Shanna saw an unfamiliar ceiling in front of her, but she actually understood what had happened to her. She was her usual good self, reading only love novels with the tag hardcore, and being like that, she should have realized from the first second who she'd been possessed by. Noticing that she now had wavy pink hair, amber eyes as if mixed with honey and a teenage face, and that the maids who came into the room called her Shauna, the heroine froze alarmed because nothing came to her mind, and she didn't remember a heroine with that appearance and name. With a frightened hand covering her mouth, the girl suggested that her heroine had either been killed by an evil woman or perhaps kicked out of the house when the truth about being adopted surfaced. Without moving away from the mirror, the girl realized that if she appeared on one of the pages of the novel she had read, the future would not be smooth at all, because in this novel, all the men were those other psychos. Turning away and thinking about it, the protagonist decided that whichever character she became possessed by was bound to be connected to the protagonist in some way, which meant that if she did connect with him, he would plop her on the bed as the protagonist. Suddenly, a girl entered and interrupted the reborn's musings and introduced herself as a maid from the outhouse named Anne, and then offered to escort the newcomer to the third gentleman. On the way, the heroine scrutinized the area, but realized with horror that she did not recognize her, and the maid, noticing her confusion, explained that they had come to the building where the third young lord's training would take place, and the guide's belongings would soon be moved here, but for now, she should follow her. Returning from her thoughts back to the very beginning, the heroine examined the new acquaintance and noted that he had black hair like night, clear blue eyes, and looked very much like the main character, Bliss, from the novel Blue Flame, Red Flame. From the girl's recollections of the novel's plot, we learn that Bliss, born into a family of mages and subjected to bullying, meets a new one in the form of the protagonist after the death of an inept guide and is successfully awakened. Now this inept guide is her, Shauna. After guessing that she was a character who dies back at the beginning, the heroine sadly lowered her head. Now she realized why she was having trouble remembering her. There was an awkward silence, and the boy, determined to break it, asked the new assistant to start directing him, and noticing her confusion, asked if she didn't know how to direct. In fact, the poor girl didn't even know what directing was. The heroine remembered that direction in the novel is something she has no aptitude for. For in the novel, Bliss indulged in a close act of love with the protagonist for days and nights under the pretext of direction, but immediately guessed that she shouldn't. Apparently they were both still teenagers now, so it would be a problem to repeat what was described in the novel. Embarrassed by her own thoughts, the heroine smiled guiltily and reminded him that today was the first day, and they'd better spend it getting to know each other. The girl explained her proposal by saying that if she knew what the new acquaintance was like as a human, it would increase the effectiveness of their training. But the one who heard this irritatedly said that it was bullshit. Disappointedly turning away, the boy said that he had originally known that his direction would not go through properly, as the guide his father had hired was not someone he could expect anything from, nor did he think she would turn out to be so young. When Bliss guessed that the new acquaintance was 15 years old, he said that meant that she had just received a certificate from the Mages Association and took offense at the fact that the older brothers had brought guides with years of experience to him, but only a girl 3 years older than him. Having guessed that the protagonist of the novel she had read was now 12 years old, then only 8 years remained before she left. The girl frightenedly froze, and the latter, paying no attention to it, despaired, and, lowering his head, confessed that his father had no hopes for him, and frankly speaking, if he were in his place, he would not expect anything from himself either. The heroine remembered that Bliss was the illegitimate son of the Duke of Huff, who thought he had precious blood in him, so he ignorantly abandoned him. But it wasn't as if the boy had an aptitude for magic, and his father began to treat him like an abandoned child of the lower class. Unable to keep his pants on, the Duke cheated with a young maid. This was the reason for his hatred of the innocent Bliss, who now turned his back and asked the heroine to leave, as there was no use for her anyway, so there was no need to imitate the guide. With a disappointed look at the teenager, the protagonist realized that he was already giving up on her. She knew he would give up on her completely before he even met the novel's protagonist. But she didn't think that moment came at 12 years old. The girl felt sorry for her new acquaintance, so grabbing his hand, she noticed that the child's limb was very cold, and guessed that his body temperature was not the same as that of ordinary children. Bliss sighed in despair and reiterated that she could not help him, but the heroine looked him in the eye with a serious look and told him not to give up, explaining that it took more effort and time to make a large vessel than a small one. The boy, who was very much impressed by the metaphor, suddenly froze, and the lady, without releasing his hand, said that it meant that his awakening would take a little longer than the others, but that the results of his blossoming would be so great that they could not be compared with others. The astonished child, barely able to find the words, asked how such a young guide knew about it and why she was so sure of it, to which she, smiling, replied that she simply believed in him, so he too should not doubt himself. To help Bliss's channeling go more efficiently, Shanna began living in his outhouse. Now she guessed that since she was a guide, her role was to nurture and educate the yet-to-be-awakened child. The heroine started reading the book and realized that, if you look at the situation in a broader sense, these are the tasks of a nanny and a home teacher. But in general, mostly mages from simple families work as guides. And the more experience such a mage has, the more valuable he is. The older he is, the more capable he is. It happens that some families hire young guides to conduct natural channeling in a calm environment. But Duke Huff didn't hire Shanna for that. He was Bliss's first guide and was going to awaken him himself, but the latter failed to achieve any success, even after reaching the age of 10, so the Duke gave up. Finishing the book, the heroine thought about the fact that, although the Duke had put a guide to Bliss for fear of judgment, it was obvious to everyone that it was done to save money, and he had put her there. Even though she couldn't guide now, she suddenly thought seriously about how she was going to inject mana into the child. After reading a small instruction on how to inject mana into a person, the girl learned that in the first step, the guide injects his mana through his fingertips, and the student's mana reacts to it, so a light touch is inevitable. But she remembered that in the novel, these two had been around for a long time, so a light touch would not be enough for the mana to appear. Trying to act as instructed, the protagonist tried to channel her mana into her fingertips, but it didn't work, so she collapsed on the bed and moaned hysterically, deciding to meditate today. Sitting down across from Bliss, the heroine asked him to close his eyes and feel the mana flowing within him, and he tried in surprise to claim that this was the first time such a thing had been asked of him during his deployment, but was immediately interrupted by the guide, who held out her hand and asked him to focus, as this was a battle of his fortitude. Some time later, the girl, lying on her bed, thought anxiously about the fact that she had been stalling until the correct methodology of direction had been found out. But Bliss had been meditating hard all day long, which made her feel very remorseful. The protagonist guessed that he couldn't meditate for the next 8 years, so she was already thinking through how she could quit her position as a guide as well. But the problem was her lifetime contract, which meant she would be allowed to leave the Huff family if either the boy successfully awakens or she should die due to an accident. Looking wistfully up at the ceiling, the conductor reassured herself that a lifetime contract was a common thing, for it was rare for an awakening to fail, and a conductor couldn't lose his job if he didn't want to. But she realized that the contract was still terrible for her. Desperately clutching her pillow, Shanna tried to figure out why she hadn't switched places with the protagonist from the beginning, and afterward began to think of ways to leave this place. She wanted to pretend to be dead so that the contract would be cancelled, or find the protagonist to take Bliss with her, or just hold out until the end without doing anything. The poor girl, who had been plagued by troubling thoughts, decided that she didn't want to be around Bliss for long, because although he was without a doubt a handsome and charming protagonist, he had a huge obsession and attachment to the main character. Shauna recalled that in the boy's miserable life, a wonderful savior appeared in the form of the protagonist, and so that she could never leave, he carved a magical seal that allowed her location to be known. Then the protagonist, realizing that she could not free herself from him, gave up and closed her heart completely. And eventually the novel ended, with Bliss happy to possess only a shell of the protagonist. The girl fell to the floor. Such thoughts exhausted her, and afterward, she guessed that if Bliss met the main character later, he would still have the same character as in the work, which meant that she could also fall under his hot hand if she stayed near him, so she needed to distance herself from him as far as possible. With a relieved sigh and tossing the finished book up carelessly, the heroine decided, regardless of the original story, to enjoy the happy life of a sorceress, because even if she didn't manage to inject mana into the child, she could still manifest enough magic. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by a maid, who made the girl notice that in this wing all the workers always had faces like dead men, and today she looked even more gloomy. The maid, bowing respectfully, said that the young master did not wish to study with her today, so she could rest. The pale heroine wondered why a child so desirous of awakening would suddenly decide to cancel the meeting, and she was horrified to suppose that he had guessed that meditation was useless. But still, she decided not to frighten herself in vain, and asked the maid the reason for canceling the class. The maid replied that today the young gentleman had been chosen as keeper, but the condition of such was a little peculiar, so she thought the boy was much confused, and the girl realized that the one must not be confused but upset, so she decided to go to him. Walking down the corridor, the heroine thought about the fact that in this house there are no decent adults, because no matter what the relationship with the head of the family and the staff, if a child is sad, an adult should comfort him. But here, everyone pretends that it's none of their business. And after all, neglect is also a sin. Knocking on the young gentleman's door, Shanna politely introduced herself, and the owner of the room reiterated that he didn't want to do any direction today. That's when she came to realize that right now, the protagonist with a crazy obsession with the future was crying alone. The girl, determined not to give up, explained that she had come not for a referral, but because she missed her new acquaintance, but remembered that he must be concerned about the keeper, and it was too tactless to tease him, so she said she was joking and offered to talk about the keeper. Bliss, despairing, asked if she was laughing at him, and stated that he looked ridiculous in her eyes, so she was mocking him and treating him like a child. However, the girl who thought she was treating him normally admitted that she was just worried about him, since he had suddenly canceled a referral. However, the boy took no pity and said that he was not a pathetic person that someone like her could easily worry about. Putting on an insincere smile, the heroine thought that he wanted to ruin her self-esteem on purpose, but immediately realized that he just doesn't know how to recognize kindness, and it's understandable, considering the environment in which his childhood took place. But she is completely different from them. The sorceress kept her hands up and explained that she was only worried about him because she was sad for him. Raising a finger to draw attention to herself, she asked her interlocutor to think about the opposite situation, in which she would abruptly stop wanting to work as his guide and see him, to which he reacted calmly, noting that she couldn't do that because it was her job. In fact, the heroine agreed with the boy's words, but objected, saying that she could if she was negligent in her duties, and then asked if he would not be worried about her, to which she received an extremely cold, negative answer, which annoyed her. Having guessed that the interlocutor and really does not show any interest in her, the protagonist admitted that and did not hope for such a relationship with the hero with a mad obsession, but she's still a few years to work for him. In truth, she's just an inconspicuous third-rate character, and she's been in this position before. For example, in her previous life she was a nobody, but in this world she didn't want to be that person. Bliss, having calmed down, interrupted her and told her to stop, because he understood everything. There was an awkward silence, so that the guest even thought that he did not want to see her anymore. But the boy, with a heavy sigh, let the acquaintance into his room. After waiting for the sorceress to come in, the hero told her that he had refused today's direction only because he had other things to do. He needed to find out about the guardian who had chosen him. Upon hearing this, the girl enthusiastically congratulated him and asked him to let her have a look at him, and the man, after a little thought, agreed. We learn that a guardian is a living creature that is born by absorbing the mana stored in plants and animals. The guardian chooses the mage who will become its master, and whom it will serve for the rest of its life. But if the latter dies, this creature also emits its last breath and returns to nature. Hence, it is very honorable for a mage to be chosen by a strong and faithful guardian. Thinking about the plot of the novel, the heroine remembered that in the work, Bliss was extremely happy at a relatively early age that he was chosen, and was the very first to get the keeper that his brothers couldn't get. Even though the boy hasn't awakened yet, he already has limitless abilities as a mage. As she looked at the keeper, the girl guessed that the disappointment must have been as great as the happiness, because the keeper was definitely unattractive. That's why Duke Huff now hated Bliss even more, saying that he had ruined his reputation and his brothers mocked him. But after all, the heroine knew what was in the novel, so she immediately remembered that this ball of fur was none other than a snowy white dragon, possessing a white body, eyes like black pearls, and shining scales the color of opal. This dragon was known for its beauty and its opposite cruelty and ruthlessness. The girl also remembered that he, moreover, had not been shown as a guardian for a long time, and his existence was akin to legend. If such a dragon appeared after several centuries and chose Bliss as his master, he would surely become the strongest in the world. Turning back to the boy, the protagonist exclaimed admiringly that his keeper was quite cute and handsome, but Bliss gave her a stern look and asked not to be deceived. He himself knew that his new keeper was unassuming. Suddenly a voice called out to the young mage, and the enchantress, hearing it, turned sharply, but realized that the young master had not heard anything. So she began to explain to him, as suddenly the little keeper told him that his owner could not hear that voice. The boy, agitated by the fact that the interlocutor abruptly stopped talking, asked what she was talking about, but she waved her hands in confusion and said that she had imagined it. But in fact she realized that Bliss's keeper was talking to her now, and she froze fearfully. The little lump told her that he was talking to her because he had a story he only wanted to tell her, and asked right now to take him to a place where his master wasn't, so they could have a proper conversation. The heroine was very surprised by what was happening, because usually, until the keeper grows up, he is silent, and there was nothing in the novel about the keeper having private conversations with Bliss's incompetent guide. Realizing that things were bad, the young mage decided to pretend that nothing was wrong, but the guardian immediately guessed her plan and decided to motion for her to listen to him, and afterwards stated that he had a very important statement related to the death and life of his master. The surprised boy looked at the keeper and asked why he was making so much noise if he had been quiet a moment ago, to which the girl, stroking the little lump, replied that he seemed uncomfortable here and added that his body was cold. Taking the basket with the keeper, the protagonist said she would immerse him in warm water and promised that he would not drown because she would see to it. But the boy, with a doubtful look at her, said that this was for the servants to do, and she was his guide, not his maid, and such duties were not her job. Deciding not to lose her composure, the heroine smiled affectionately and explained that, on the contrary, it would be better if she took care of it, because it was difficult for ordinary people to cope with the keeper, and afterwards promised that the young master would do it himself next time, because if he fed and bathed him, they would quickly become friends. The boy said he didn't want to be friends with the keeper at all, but let the guide go, who, bringing the lump to the water tank, began to adjust the water to a comfortable temperature for him. Finally, the keeper was in the water, and a black aura began to spread around him, which greatly frightened the sorceress, who had already guessed that magic was flowing out of him in great quantities, which meant that he was storing great power and malice since they had so polluted the water. Coughing, the keeper began his story by saying that he had slept in the ground for a long time, and the traces of nature that had been absorbed during that time came out now. And the heroine, guessing that it was mud, exclaimed indignantly what kind of traces of nature it was that the ox had become so dirty, and stepped away. The guardian asked the girl not to make a fuss about personal belongings, and asked her to stop making idle chatter and come over to him. But the interviewee hesitated to say that this amount of dirt coming out of such a small body was a personal thing. The indignant lump remarked that his current appearance didn't scare her, but stated that when he grew up, no one would be able to look down on him anymore, to which the girl agreed. She knew his true nature. His original image was that of a white snow dragon, born to bring tranquility to this world by fighting evil with the help of dark forces. The young sorceress looked enthusiastically at the baby, pretending that she was very interested in it and she didn't know about it before. And then she remembered that she called Bliss's keeper a white dragon, and originally there was also a variant White Snow, but this name didn't suit him very well, and White Dragon just right. Turning to the mage again, the white dragon asked if she knew why he had chosen the third son of the Huff family as his master, and she guessed that it was because the young master harbored great mana potential. Realizing that if the guide noticed it, then he couldn't look at her high because of her youth, because she too had felt this mana, which meant that she must know about his master's problem. But the girl immediately froze and wanted to answer how she knew, but decided not to be rude and just nod. Noticing that the heroine knew everything, the keeper told her that his master's mana was completely blocked. The young sorceress froze with surprise and realized that this was the first time she had heard of this, as she had previously thought that Bliss had awakened late due to an incompetent guide. The guardian, who had suddenly interrupted her musings, explained that this was the reason he had spoken to her, and the master was unable to hear his voice as he had no mana at all. Remembering that the novel claimed that the boy would awaken in a few years when he met the protagonist, which meant that there was no need to worry about it, Shauna asked if the young lord's mana would ever be released. But the interlocutor, with a guilty look on his face, said that he wouldn't awaken until his death if things were left like this. Finishing that Bliss could only do it in an abnormal way by entering a situation of excess, the whitened lump explained that right now, the situation was extremely dangerous, and the mana accumulating inside his body was causing him damage. So soon, his master wouldn't be able to keep it inside him, and then lethality was possible. The heroine, now pale with horror, asked if the child would be all right if the awakening went well, to which the interlocutor replied that even a successful awakening would not solve the main problem, in which case, death might soon befall him. Shrinking from fright, the worried sorceress realized that the young master would die either way, but she remembered that in the book, the events begin a year or two after Bliss's awakening, which means that although the novel doesn't mention it, he could have died after it ended. He has a very unhappy life. The guardian, turning again to his new acquaintance, said that in order to keep his master from dying, he needed her help as a guide, to which the latter was very much surprised, and said that she probably should not get involved in this, and it would be better if instead of being useless and inexperienced, her young master was helped by a snowy white dragon. After listening to her excuses, the guardian disagreed, telling her that he couldn't control his mana perfectly until he matured, so if he touched his master's mana in his current state, they could both die, and he couldn't accelerate his natural growth, and when he reached maturity, it would be all over for his master. Noticing the girl's opposition, The guardian asked her the reason for her refusal, and she lowered her head guiltily and said that it was because she didn't know what to do. The attendant, taking pity, asked her to just do her job as a guide, but the mage immediately realized that if she continued to do what she was doing, Bliss would simply die at an early age. Interrupting her musings, the white dragon told her that his master's body temperature was lower than it needed to be because he was born with a huge amount of mana, but it couldn't circulate, causing it to stagnate in his body, and it was negatively affecting his psychological and physical health. Not wanting to end there, the guardian also told that his master does not show his emotions, but restrains them inside, because this habit was formed in him because of the restraint of mana, but he does not know it himself. After thinking about it, the girl realized that the poor guy had such a character because of mana, which meant that if the mana problem was solved, Bliss wouldn't become a character with a sick attachment. And afterwards, she answered her interlocutor's question by saying that it would be easier for the character to show emotion than to start a cycle of accumulated mana. Noticing that the clever girl had guessed the meaning of his words, the guardian smiled and said that she would be able to help his master show his feelings, because if he became skillful in expressing his emotions, it would be easier for him to stop suppressing mana. The mage still didn't understand what her interlocutor was getting at, so the latter, noticing her confusion, asked her for a not very difficult favor: to raise his master's body temperature using his own body heat, since his temperature was lower than normal, and with a heated body it was easier to release tension and show emotions. The heroine turned pale with horror and covered in cold sweat, because she remembered that this method of channeling was used by the protagonist towards Bliss. She warmed him up, and then what was described in the novel also happened. Finding the keeper's request impertinent, the girl exclaimed that the young master was only 12 and she was 15, so it wouldn't work. She decided that even though this was a fantasy world, she wouldn't overstep her moral principles and do such adult things. Guessing what the young mage was thinking, the white dragon said that her appearance was deceptive, and there was an insidious serpent inside her, if she could even think of such a thing, and then explained that he meant for her to warm his master by holding back the mana in her hands, meaning they were just supposed to hold hands. The indignant keeper called people pathetic because they go after their desires, regardless of age and gender, and the embarrassed girl, blushing, decided not to argue and asked if the effect of simply holding hands, to which she received the answer that, although it is a simple method, but if you regularly repeat the process, it will be. Noticing her doubt, the white dragon explained that physical condition and mana were closely related. So if the blood circulation in his body helped him to warm up, then it would be easier to activate mana, because body temperature could be changed both directly and indirectly. Glancing at the pale heroine, the guardian noted that she had a talent for irritating his master, but reminded him that he had not said she should make him angry. On the contrary, she should build a support for him to show his emotions like a child. Tiredly covering his eyes, the dragon asked the girl to do it again, since, except for her, he had no person he could trust with such a request, and then made a cute face when he noticed that his master was coming, which surprised his interlocutor very much. The boy who came in asked why they were gone so long and explained that he thought they had both drowned. But the girl immediately grabbed the fluffy boy, who looked at her confidently and said he was watching, so she should try to share her warmth with his master right there. The heroine was not sure of her powers, but under the pressure of the keeper, decided to try and hand it a small lump of young gentleman, who immediately froze frightened because he did not recognize his whitened assistant, who had recently been blacker than night. After waiting for the boy to take the keeper, the girl exclaimed why his hands were so icy and, saying it was no good, began to warm his limbs with her own very warm ones. Following the guardian's instruction, the heroine began to let the mana flow as she suddenly opened her eyes in surprise and realized that there had just been a reaction. But the young lord jerked his hands away at the same moment, stating that it was not necessary. The young sorceress tried to stop Bliss, but then he was already running away, and she, frozen with fright, guessed that she had ruined everything, with which, however, the lump did not agree and praised her for a good try. In the second week, the heroine changed her channeling technique to the one suggested by the white dragon and tried to warm Bliss's hands by taking on the role of a grandmother caring for her grandson. But the result was always the same. The familiar always yanked his hands away. Due to the constant failures one day, the sorceress conferred with the white dragon again, asking if it would have the opposite effect if she continued to touch it, despite not liking being touched. But the keeper reminded her that it would die if she failed. While the boy was meditating, the girl asked again if it was true that his life was in danger, to which the dragon replied that she should do it naturally, from the bottom of her heart, as it was useless to help only out of a sense of duty, and afterward hastened to reassure her, saying that there was a result. Noticing that his companion didn't know what he was talking about, the snow dragon explained that his master's hands were warmer than before, and when she took hold of them, the back of his head turned red and laughed at his assistant, sarcastically asking her to make his master even angrier. The poor girl didn't understand at all what the white dragon was saying. Every day she worried that she was making Bliss uncomfortable, but now she had good thoughts about today, because today practice would be outside. Thinking about her past life, the girl remembered that in her past life she had vowed never to enjoy training outside the house, as she was a typical homebody. But things are different here, and in this world she doesn't have a phone, TV, or computer, which means she goes crazy with boredom here. Because all her days had become similar to each other, the heroine loved the white dragon's suggestion to practice outside and even wondered why she hadn't realized it sooner. The boy, who was already dressed and standing with the keeper, asked the conductor who came up what the basket was in her hands, to which she replied that she had taken a snack with her in case they were hungry. But the gentleman, with an irritated sigh, declared that if anyone saw them, they would think they were going on a picnic. Before taking the girl outside, Bliss informed her that no one was in charge of the place, causing the garden to be a bit neglected, and she guessed that he was embarrassed to show the garden's unkempt appearance, and hastened to reassure him by reminding him that they were going there for directions, not for a picnic. Finally finding themselves in the garden, the heroine was confused, noticing that it was not a small neglect, but a complete mess. But immediately coming back to reality, suggested that they go into the shade. Approaching the tree, the boy took off his jacket and laid it in front of Shanna for her strength, and then, noticing her questioning look, explained that a gentleman could not allow a lady to sit on bare ground. The heroine hurriedly sat down on the bedstead and thanked him, calling him very thoughtful, and confidently declared that she was sure he would be popular with young ladies in the future. But he turned away embarrassed and asked her not to say such strange things. Grinning, the girl guessed that the man was embarrassed by the compliment, as she was suddenly interrupted by the keeper, who ordered her to keep talking and embarrass his master to steal the teenage boy's soul completely with stories about girls. The poor sorceress didn't want to do it, but realizing she had no choice, she told the boy that when he grew up, he would meet a beautiful girl and fall in love with her, and in general, a terrific kind man like him would steal many hearts. Annoyed at the speaker, Bliss asked if she would like it if he talked such nonsense, saying that she would meet a nice man and fall in love with him. But she said to his surprise that she would like to hear it, because when she, like him, grew up, she would meet an admirable man and fall in love with him. The sad boy asked the conductor if she really thought she could leave this outhouse, and explained that the contract stipulated that if he couldn't awaken, she couldn't leave here either, so perhaps they would be locked in here forever, and everyone would forget about them. The poor boy admitted that he had guessed it long ago, so it was nothing. But she didn't know anything, since she was talking about such unfamiliar to her concepts as love and marriage, which surprised the listener, who, fearfully covering her mouth, exclaimed why he was talking about such terrible things. As she looked at the child's guiltily lowered head, the girl guessed that he was telling her to prepare for a terrible end with him, because he himself firmly believed that he would not be able to awaken. Now she was sad that he had such pessimistic thoughts about his future. Having decided that she was not going to fall into despair and assert, "Yes, we are doomed," the heroine resolutely declared that the young gentleman would awaken no matter what, and he should only think about his awakening, and she would definitely meet a young, handsome man with broad shoulders and embossed abs. The astonished boy wanted to ask how she could speak so openly and vainly, but was interrupted by the interlocutor, who enthusiastically proposed to start the class. After the class, the tired boy collapsed from impotence, breathing heavily, and the conductress, smiling gently, praised him, took out a fresh cookie from her basket, on which the poor fellow immediately pounced and offered to wipe him of his sweat. The young gentleman took a bite of the cookie and coughed and spit it out, shouting what a strange cookie he had just tasted, to which the heroine smiled and replied that there was nothing strange about it, so he could eat it all. She didn't want the cookie to taste ordinary, so she added a pinch of magic to it. The boy, coming to his senses and irritably shaking off the crumbs from his mouth, asked why even she was trying to mock him, and she, realizing that her plan had failed, waved her hands guiltily, explaining that it was only a joke. Noticing the distrust of the interlocutor, the heroine said that she just wanted to make the texture of the cookies interesting, because where she lived, that is, in that distant country, was very popular cookies, melting in the mouth, and liked everyone, because it is just incredibly tasty. When the girl decided to try the cookies too, she said that they were very similar, but next time they should make them harder. The boy, noticing the blissful expression on her acquaintance's face, was stunned, and sighing, said that she looked like a mutant. The poor sorceress, immediately distracted from her meal, thought that he was trying to insult her. But Bliss explained that she was a bit out of touch with the manner, as he suddenly noticed nearby the wreath that his guide had made, and said that he wouldn't wear it even under threat of death. The girl froze in surprise, guessing that Bliss thought she had woven the wreath for him, and noting that he was jumping to conclusions prematurely, and then resenting the fact that he had also called her a mutant because he thought she was doing strange things. Deciding to play along with the boy, the heroine held out the wreath to him and asked him to wear it just once, but the boy, horrified, asked her to stay away and told her that it would fit her, not him. Having uttered either a compliment or an insult, the hero was embarrassed, and his guide, having gratefully covered her eyes, thanked him, but said that she would like to give it to him instead of keeping it for herself, because his hair color was like the night sky, and his eyes, the ocean, and if you add the color of the local land, it would be a perfect combination. The boy, hearing the compliments, stopped resisting and let the acquaintance put a wreath on him, but suddenly their conversation was interrupted by his approaching father, Duke Jonathan Huff, and the shocked child crawled away frightened. The angry man, turning to his son, declared that he had come to see what he had left the outhouse for with his guide, and it turned out to be to talk and have fun, and after listening to the apology of the offending man, asked him not to call him father, as he did not wish to recognize such a one as he was as his son. The heroine, who had been silently watching the whole time, noted that Bliss had never once objected and was acting too submissive, so she realized that the Duke was so cruel to his son that he couldn't utter anything but a single, "I'm sorry." Determined to protect her acquaintance, Shanna stepped forward and explained to the gentleman that he seemed to have misunderstood everything. In fact, she was the one who had suggested that the young gentleman practice outside because nature was good for mana circulation, which increased the chances of awakening. That was the reason they practiced outside. With a proud hand to her chest, the sorceress told him that young Mr. Bliss had spent a lot of effort in perceiving natural mana, so they had taken a short break to restore his energy, and added that a noble mage like him should know that mana originated from physical strength. The Duke, grabbing the wreath, asked if this item was also part of the practice, and if the guide really believed that the woven flowers worn on the head helped to better feel the mana. But Bliss, noticing that his acquaintance was stumped, grabbed his father's arm and gave him a stern look. With his head lowered guiltily, the young lord admitted that he had behaved foolishly and would not do so again, to which his father, with another stern look at his child, advised him to think carefully about his situation and not to disgrace the Huff family, and he promised that he would not make him worry again. After waiting for the Duke to leave and being alone with the boy, the heroine asked him not to worry too much, to which he picked up the disappointed keeper from the ground and agreed, because, according to him, his efforts were useless anyway, so she should also stop getting involved in this hopeless endeavor. After Duke Huff had forbidden Bliss to leave the house, he developed a fever, so he could not leave not only the outbuilding, but even his room. But the heroine decided that, since the novel did not mention it, then the disease is not so serious and should not worry. However, in the girl's opinion, the main problem was the employees. Whether it was the main building or the outhouse, they try to stay out of the Duke's sight, which means they also avoid Bliss and hardly care about him. So that would have to be found out. The young sorceress asked the maid what her friend's recent condition was, to which she replied that he still had a high fever, but no major ailments, but she did not know if he was eating well. This statement angered her, who thought that it was their main task to know if he had eaten and taken his medicine. The girl asked irritably if the maid knew whether Duke Huff had called a doctor, and the maid replied that she was unfortunately not aware of that either, as she had only been hired to work in the annex, and had no opportunity to cross paths with either the estate staff or the lord. Hearing the disappointing reply, Shayna said that there was, after all, a person who reported to Duke Huff about the young lord, and her interlocutor, barely hearing the harsh statement, froze fearfully. Noticing the girl's excitement, the heroine immediately guessed that the day she left home with Bliss, the Duke had appeared too unexpectedly. Realizing that the maid was reporting everything to him, the girl asked her to tell the man in detail about the young master's condition, for the third son had been ill for a week, and no measures had been taken during that time. The maid gritted her teeth irritably, noting her mistress's insistence, and remembered that she had been assigned to this dilapidated outhouse without her willingness to do so. So she resented the fact that some girl was now trying to teach her as if she were the mistress. Though her family had broken up, the maid was still the daughter of the Baron, and she need not try to please this commoner. So she bowed and promised to take it into consideration, and said that she, however, was not a worker in this wing, and everyone here had their own duties, so she should not interfere with other people's work. The heroine said that she knew that she thought she was a very arrogant guide with poor abilities who was also a commoner, but even if that was true, she still couldn't neglect the young master. Noticing the listener's embarrassment, the girl asked if she really thought that if the young master was ill, she had no responsibility for him, to which the maid replied, lowering her head in the negative. As she approached the girl, the sorceress repeated her answer, as if trying to get it across to her herself, and reminded her that young Mr. Bliss was the master of this outhouse, and they were all hired to serve him. Deciding to stop reprimanding the guilty one, the guide asked if it was time to take the young gentleman his supper, and immediately offered to do it herself, which surprised the maid, who said it was her job. However, the girl contradicted her, saying that judging from her words, if she really didn't look down on him, she certainly didn't know how to take care of a sick person, and added that since she had experience in this matter, she would help. When she came to the young gentleman's room and knocked at the door, the guide informed him that she had brought him food. But the master was obviously in a bad temper, so he asked her to leave what she had brought and go away, and the latter, embarrassed, remarked that the illness was passing, so that he was able to answer, though his voice was hoarse. Hearing a strange sound, the girl frightenedly opened the door and ran up to the child who had fallen to the floor, noticing that he was all on fire, and then apologized for coming to him late enough. Placing his hand on his acquaintance's arm, the boy asked why she was apologizing if she had done nothing wrong, but never looked up at her. So she looked at the sick man again and thought he had fallen asleep. The sorceress had barely regained consciousness when she was suddenly called out by an angry guardian who asked why she had only come now. He thought she would have come sooner, and told her that his master had barely eaten anything. Looking at the poor boy who was sweating profusely, the heroine guessed that his fever didn't seem to be dropping due to exhaustion, and the keeper said that he probably wasn't recovering due to psychological problems. But still, he was changing a bit due to their efforts. According to the White Dragon, at least for a little while, the door to Bliss's soul had opened, but after meeting his father, he had slammed it shut again, and now he had no desire to recover. On waking up, the young gentleman felt his body felt unusually light, and guessed that the fever had subsided, as suddenly turning his head to the side, he found the guide lying nearby and did not realize what she was doing here. Hearing someone rejoicing that his condition was much improved, Bliss rose abruptly from the bed and turned startled at the voice, at first not seeing the keeper and thinking he had imagined it. Looking at Shauna again, the boy remembered yelling that he didn't want to go to that house because he didn't like all those people, and it was scary there. And holding out his hand, he asked the girl not to go, promising to do as she told him. Tiredly sinking down on the bed, the young gentleman, keeping his eyes on the girl, thought that he was very tired. So, taking her hand, he decided to sleep a little longer. Time passed. The seasons changed, and Bliss's 13th birthday arrived. Before the evening banquet began, Shauna sat quietly in her bedroom in a dreadful mood. She didn't see the point in waiting for the banquet if everyone already knew it was going to go horribly. We learned that both Bliss and Michael were born in February, and because of the difference of a few days, the brothers always celebrated their birthdays together. But even though the holiday was officially dedicated to both of them, Michael was always the main celebrant. When Bliss entered the banquet hall, the Huff family pretended not to know him, and the guests whispered behind his back, which made the boy's departure seem more like an escape, after which he went back to his outhouse and spent the rest of the day in bed. Besides, not a single person congratulated him, and there were no gifts to speak of. The conductor, falling disappointedly on the bed, remembered that she had thought of giving the poor boy a separate party, but immediately dismissed the idea, since no one wants to celebrate his birthday, just the two of them, and such an arrangement would have hurt him even more. Lifting her gift up, the heroine wondered if it would also be useless, and afterwards decided that since she couldn't celebrate her birthday with Bliss, she would at least give him a present, but not an ordinary one, but one using magic, which the white dragon also helped her create. Deciding to give the gift to her acquaintance as soon as possible, the girl went to his room, but did not find him there. And thinking that he might have gone to the banquet hall, she remembered that the book said that he was not present at the banquet, so he was definitely not there. Suddenly, the heroine froze, suggesting that perhaps the young lord had gained confidence, and that was why he had gone there, for she had recently sensed his mana, albeit vaguely, and the white dragon had said that he had heard his voice. Turning around, the sorceress realized that now that she had sensed the mana, she really wanted to brag about her accomplishment. But Bliss was only a 13-year-old teenage boy anyway. On the way to the banquet hall, the heroine thought about how she didn't want to get caught up with the Huff family. But on the other hand, she was curious what Bliss's two older brothers looked like. The novel said they were handsome, but not as handsome as their younger brother. And besides, if she got a chance to see them, she'd know roughly what the boy would be like when he grew up. Guessing that the brothers probably didn't know her, the sorceress decided to watch them from afar, so that there would be no problem, when suddenly she was stopped by a servant guarding the entrance, who asked her to give her name if she was invited. Remembering that she had no invitation, Shauna put her hand to her chest and introduced herself as the guide of young Mr. Bliss, the host of tonight's banquet, and the man, glancing at her suspiciously, still did not interfere. Opening the girl's door, the servant loudly introduced her as the young master's guide, so that everyone turned around. Looking indignantly at the servant, the entrant realized that he had purposely done this to make her look bad. The heroine sighed in relief and was glad that she had managed to hide from the eyes of the aristocrats, and then decided to quickly find Bliss, give him the gift, and leave. Peeking out from her hiding place and searching for the boy with her eyes, the girl suddenly jumped in surprise when she was approached sharply by a man who asked what she was doing here and recognized her as the birthday boy's guide. When she guessed that, judging by the rude attitude, she had been approached by Michael, the youngest of Bliss's older brothers, the guide bowed respectfully and said that she had come here to meet the young gentleman. But the displeased interlocutor, asking why she was looking for him here, said that people like her were not welcome here. Looming over the enchantress, the man said that only aristocrats could come here, so neither she nor his younger brother could be here. The embarrassed girl turned away guiltily, apologized, and was about to leave, when suddenly the guy came close to her against the wall and asked her if she really thought that she could come to the banquet dedicated to his birthday and leave when she wanted to, and even without doing anything. The poor girl realized she was in trouble and congratulated the birthday boy on his birthday, but he smiled slyly and asked her to give him the present and go. Clutching the box tightly to her, The sorceress said it was for young Mr. Bliss, and the aggressor, grinning, said that it was his birthday and therefore the gift belonged to him. But the girl did not plan to back down and repeated that it was his brother's birthday as well, and apologized for not preparing a gift for the second birthday boy as well. The angry interlocutor did not want to wait for another gift, so he snatched the box from the defenseless child and said that he wanted this one, which greatly angered the lady, who noticed that he was behaving inappropriately for a 15-year-old boy and tried to take away the gift. Guessing that the guest was making such a fuss because there was something important in there, the cheeky man opened the box and took out cheap gloves that could easily be found in the city, but immediately realized that they were enchanted and asked what spell she had put on them. The girl tensed up, and the guy continued to insist that she tell him what spell she had used. But the victim still didn't feel like answering that, so after thinking she would like to hit him at least once, she sighed tiredly and repeated that this gift was for young Mr. Bliss. Finishing that, she had only cast the necessary spell for him, and it had nothing to do with the young gentleman. The guide looked at the boy again, who stated that she was much braver than Bliss, but she was not allowed to behave that way with him, as worms stick to worms and she was being too brazen. The frightened sorceress tried to calm herself with thoughts that everything was fine, and there were many people here, so he wouldn't touch her. Noticing that the insolent guest was also looking at him, still holding her head high, Michael swung at her as he was suddenly called by his brother. Henry reminded him that they had gathered for his birthday and asked him not to make a fuss, but he indignantly declared that it was all because of Bliss's conductor, who was taunting him. Finally, turning his attention to the girl standing near them, the approaching man remarked that this was their first meeting and introduced himself as the eldest son in the Huff family, Henry Huff, whereupon the poor girl, bowing, introduced herself in return. Turning to his new acquaintance, Henry noticed that Michael was giving her trouble and asked what was wrong, and the sorceress, with an irritated nod of her head, realized that she shouldn't have gotten in his face. We learn that from the outside it appears that Henry has no negative feelings towards Bliss, but in reality, he disrespects him to the core and also ignores him. After the awakening of the young lord, Henry became tormented by an inferiority complex and could no longer torment his younger brother, which tormented him greatly, so he and Prince Fabian conspired together to crush Bliss. Clenching her fists tightly, the girl noted that if Michael was a local thug, that Henry was a mob enforcer, and Prince Fabian was a mob boss, and then decided that, either way, there was no good in getting caught by the bad guy, so she needed to protect herself here. Turning to the approaching gentleman and putting a modest smile on her face, the heroine replied that nothing had happened, just a slight misunderstanding between them, but the listener, after questioning, guessed that the gloves were to blame and ordered Michael to return them. The girl, to defend herself, wanted to tell them not to think she needed something like that, but Michael, snickering, indifferently threw her gift to her, and Henry, with a stern look at his brother, sent him to his father. Left alone with the guests, Henry politely inquired if she had come here to meet Bliss, and, receiving an affirmative answer, said that she had now realized that he hadn't come here, so she shouldn't be confused anymore, which meant simply, not coming here. Turning to the girl who was about to leave, Henry asked if she had eaten dinner and suggested that Bliss must not have eaten either, so he let her take and share the banquet food with him, and the embarrassed heroine remembered that the person who feeds you is always nice. As he led the girl to the table, he gave her permission not to deny herself anything, and she noticed that the attendant had a serious expression on his face and thought that it was because she had agreed too quickly and she should have refused at least once. But in any case, it would be a good idea to satisfy her hunger. As soon as the enchantress touched the dishes, the ladies standing nearby began to laugh at her taking so much food, and suggested that she was acting this way because she must be very hungry. One of the gossipers asked her to keep her voice down, but another said that this girl did not look like a beggar, but still stooped to the level of stealing banquet food. One of the rude girls asked who she was, and if they shouldn't call the guards, to which the other replied that she was the young Duke Bliss's guide, and was afraid that the latter would hear, which made the girl very angry, who indeed heard everything. Angry, the heroine guessed that Henry Huff was a dog brat, and it was not a gesture of goodwill, but a mockery to make her look like a beggar, and she didn't know it and immediately agreed. That's the reason why the man made that face. The poor girl thought it was actually all a setup for her, and she guessed it right away, and the man actually believed that she would think he was a good person just because of his offer to take some food. But now he was confused because his taunt hadn't gone away. Barely holding back, the sorceress smiled sweetly at the gossiping girls, realizing that all she had to do was look so that the situation would be resolved, and then used magic to make one of the ladies pour wine on the other, much to the surprise of the other girls, and noticing that she had managed to divert their attention, hurried over to the young gentleman before she got caught in the hot hand. Going outside, the guide saw the young gentleman and his keeper sitting under a tree. The former was stroking the latter and was relaxed. So the comer, carrying a plate of food in his hands, rejoiced, but immediately wondered why he had come out of the house in such cold weather. Stopping scratching the white dragon's chin, Bliss silently took off his cloak and laid it in front of the girl, who immediately asked him to put on his cloak, and not to do it because it was cold. However, the noble child said it was fine since he was hot. After thanking him and sitting down on the bedecked cloak, Shauna, recognizing that he hadn't eaten, offered to eat together, though she hadn't brought much, and told him that this food was delicious, not at all like what he had eaten in the outhouse. Guessing that the girl had brought this food from the banquet hall, the boy asked who had told her to do so, and if she had met his brothers, to which the girl, embarrassed, replied that she had been busy eating, so she hadn't talked to anyone. But judging from the general reaction, she thought it was mauvais to take food from the banquet hall. Smiling guiltily, the sorceress admitted that she had behaved rudely, as she was not at all aware of such etiquette, but indignantly asked what she could do, as she could not just leave the already touched food. Under the attentive gaze of the boy, the heroine offered to start eating, and, holding out the fork she had also brought with her, laughed at the fact that she wouldn't talk about this shame for a long time. But if she enjoyed a delicious meal with him, she would also remember something good. The boy, having taken a fork, prepared to start eating, when suddenly the girl said that she could not eat yet. She remembered that she had not lit the candle, so she immediately brought it to the fire, lit it, inserted the cake, and asked the acquaintance to make a wish and blow out the candle, as the birthday boy usually does before eating the cake. Suddenly, the fire flared up too much, which meant that the boy had no time to resist, and together they quickly blew her out because the fire was too strong, and now sank tiredly to the ground. Looking up at the young gentleman, the girl asked if he had made a wish, and the birthday boy, who had not expected that he would have to make so much effort to blow out the candle, rose tiredly and asked if he could eat the cake already. After waiting for the child to start eating the dessert, the heroine handed him the gloves, explaining that it was his birthday present. Interested, the birthday boy took his eyes off the treat and accepted the gift, and the acquaintance immediately admitted that they were inexpensive because she didn't have much money. With her head down guiltily, the guide noticed that not only were the gloves unattractive, but Michael had torn the wrapping, which made the gift look even worse, and realized that the more she tried, the sadder Bliss became, and he wasn't even happy about the gift. When she noticed that the boy was surprised, the girl hastened to break the awkward silence and told him that she had cast a spell on the gloves, so they were perfect for him, and then added that she didn't know if he would like the gift, but it was okay if he didn't, and he just needed to put them on. Interrupting the chattering acquaintance, Bliss asked what spell she had cast, to which she replied that the gloves gave off heat, and she did it because his hands were constantly cold. Noticing that the gift did not impress the Lord, the enchantress guiltily averted her eyes, apologized, and admitted that she should have done better. But the man kept his eyes on the gloves and thanked her, saying it was fine, and asked if he wore the gloves if they would have to hold hands anymore. The sweet girl was about to agree, when suddenly the keeper intervened in the conversation and shouted that she dare not say that, so she smiled embarrassedly and said that they worked a little differently. The heroine explained that she couldn't hold his hands all the time, so in that case the gloves would help him. After putting on the gift, the boy thanked her again, smiling, and noticed that they were indeed warm. Noticing that the girl held out her finger to him, the young gentleman asked what she was doing, to which she replied that she was spreading cake cream on his face, and explained that this is what they always do with friends on their birthdays.